So, welcome everyone to this Pluriversal Design Book Club. I'm going to say this is a special one, right? Because I get to lead a conversation about this mammoth project that I'm involved in. So I'm first going to say my hi, let Marianne and Renata say hi. Introduce Kelly as well, and then we'll just jump in, right? So I'm saying hi, Mariana, Renata.
Hello, everyone. Nice to have you here today. I think it is going to be an awesome session, Leslie. I was really looking forward to it and to the discussion today. I hand over to Renata.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, I'm very happy, very excited for the conversation today. And once again, I just wanted to remind you, especially if you're new here, that this is the Pluriversal Design Book Club organized by the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group of the Design Research Society. So Leslie, you can continue. Today it's your special session.
Okay, so well, I'm going to first say I'm one of 6 authors of a huge publication, not authors, editors of a huge publication. Kelly Walters, who is another one of the editors, has also joined us for the conversation today. Kelly, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here, my first Pluriversal Design Book Club meeting. So I'm thankful to meet everybody.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm gonna start sharing my screen. We have an hour to have a conversation that should probably go on for a few hours. And I have a script and some slides, and I hope we'll see how far we get with this conversation. I hope that we'll have some discussion. And, you know, I'm gonna start off with a little bit of the discussion / analysis, and then give you a tour of the book. And we'll probably run out of time anyway, right? So just, let's see next. Okay, so I am one of the 6 editors of this 595-page book about Black design. And this project started with Anne Berry, who is the managing editor. I see Anne's iPhone on the call, right? Jennifer Rittner is the development editor, Kelly Walters, who just said hi, is a creative director. And the other editors were myself, well, Kareem, Collie, Penny, Ayo Laker, and me, right? And the book design was done by Ronald Lucent. And so what was going on? We were in 2020, which was that chaotic year. I'm going to give you all a little bit of this context. We were a few months into the pandemic. We were mourning the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. We were all just angry at that time. And I received a phone call. I actually did not really know the other editors. I knew Kareem. Kareem and I had been colleagues through the D School at Stanford, even though we weren't at the D School at the same time. But I got a call from one of the editors. I think it was Anne who gave me a call, and you know, she invited me to be part of this project, and we spent a whole lot of time. We spent several months starting to imagine what was this thing that we wanted, you know, in all of our anger about, you know, what was happening with, with Black people and particularly Black designers. And then there was that question that was always floating around in that summer, where are the Black designers, which personally I found was a horrible question. But you know, as we were responding to that, we started to imagine this book that we wanted to create. So the actual impetus of this book club was a discussion that we were having about, okay, is this book an academic book or not, right? And so, you know, as a designer / a design researcher, I did see this as an academic project where, you know, how did we do this, right? We invited 65 to 70 people, you know, designers, you know, to tell their own stories, right? We sent out invitations to them. We brainstormed first about themes, contributors, you know, who did we want in this book? What did we want to talk about? You know, we mailed prompts to people. We created weekly writing retreats so that people didn't feel alone in writing. We had recorded conversations with people. You know, we had to give people a lot of support, right, so that they could feel that empowered to contribute to this book, right? And, you know, as a result of that, we have so many things. We have reflections, posters, letters to self, tweets, all of that is in the book. Just a little bit more of the background. When we asked people to write, they could write for us 2,500 to 3,000 words if they were writing academic articles. If they were doing a more personal reflection, they could give us something in 1,500 words to 2,000 words, you know, for these personal reflections. And so we created many, many, many ways of being involved in this project for these people that we invited to be involved. So I'm going to step back a little bit to another project that I worked on, which actually was an expansion of the work of this group, which was in progress just before we started working on this project, right? So I, at the time, had been working on this project called Hello from the Pluriverse, where students of mine interviewed designers from around the world, outside of people who were outside of what is typically seen as the mainstream of design. And we collected on that project about 30 interviews. And we learned to collect these oral histories from people in very accessible ways. And then we also learned, you know, we had the experience of taking these conversations and turning them into essays. We also uploaded a lot of our interviews for that project to a podcast, which is still available online. And that project clearly influenced the way that I approached the work that I was involved in this one. So 18 months after we started our tiny idea in the anger of the summer of 2020, our book was launched, you know, on February 1st. And we planned this book to be launched during Black History Month in the US. I think it's been out of stock on Amazon a few times, so I think it's doing okay, right? But if you work on a book with 70 people, it's supposed to be successful. Each editor curated their own chapters and proposed the themes that they were interested in. So I was assigned to design scholarship, and I proposed Afrofuturism in design and collective and radical and liberatory spaces. And another interesting part of the how is that we created a Kickstarter fund to make sure that we could offer some compensation to all of the people who were involved in this project. So, you know, we, through then the support of almost 300 people, raised $21,000 so that we could pay the people who were involved. And so I'm going to pepper this with some images from the book. I'm glad to see it will be in the UK soon because people have asked about that. Someone asked, when will it be in Mozambique? This morning, I was like, okay, I have no idea, right? I think it's important for us when we do the work that we do to think about principles and the things that guide what we do. And I've thought all along about how this book is aligned with my principles. So, you know, it's like these emancipatory oral histories. It's a book for us, by us, where we figured out what we wanted in design. There are multiple forms of participation. People are telling their own stories. There are many points of view, stories of agency, liberation, and not just exclusion and oppression. And the what. So after we invited 70 people to tell their own stories, or actually before that, this what is about, if we wanted to look at this through a research lens, because I said that was the question, is this academic? I see this as a really big ethnographic project, you know, almost like a time capsule where we could then look back in 40 years at what were these Black designers interested in 2022. It is a bit of a phenomenology where we are thinking about what is this experience of Black design. Narrative inquiry is another research lens we could look at, we could analyze it through. Myself and Kareem Collie, we keep saying this is a participatory design project, you know, because we thought of what we wanted, but actually as we worked with these 70 people, the book started to change a little bit. So what resulted was not what we thought was going to come out, right? It could be, again, another grounded theory where we are looking to see, well, what are the themes that are starting to emerge when we talk to these 70 Black designers? And I said this earlier, it's emancipatory research for us, by us. And so the content, after we got these 70 people to be involved, you know, and what do we have? We have visual essays, other types of essays, letters, journal reflections. They're actually somebody's journal, you know, some entries from somebody's journal. Is Quinlan Messenger's and entry is from his journal. We have several interviews. We have as told to essays. We have academic papers like Audrey Bennett's research, and Lonnie Brooks also has his academic research in it. Chris Rudd gave us a design curriculum. And then, you know, I should highlight at the end of the book, we have guiding questions, which no one really talks about, you know, like, so if you want to figure out how to analyze this book, at that end of the book, there are some questions. And then we have a glossary, which is all pretty good. And then some themes that emerge, we have frameworks for survival, resilience, and thriving, African and African diasporic practice, lots of advice for young Black designers, advice for other educators, reflections, art and design questions, gender, disability, exclusion, Blackness. You know, these are some of the themes that emerge. So already I'm seeing we're going to run out of time, right? But I'm going to invite anyone. This is how we love to do our stuff. Would anyone would like to read what Anne was saying from the introduction about why this text is needed? Anyone can jump in.
I can start.
Yes.
This text is needed because published works by Black creatives about our own contributions are still too few and far between. This book is needed because Black creatives have been historically excluded and consistently represented through a white lens. Our work and efforts co-opted and appropriated by predominantly white mainstream culture. And perhaps most importantly, this book is needed to reaffirm that Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, whether students or practitioners in creative fields, are part of a community where our gifts are talented and talents are needed.
Yeah, so this is from the introduction. Thank you, Morgan. And, you know, it's sometimes people think, okay, this is a book for Black designers. Well, I was doing advising this week where one of my students, white, male, very young, said to me, "Professor, I bought your book." And I'm like, what? You know, and he was so excited about it. So it's not just a book for Black designers. It is, I think, a book where people can see, oh, people like me do design. And he was able to see that, you know, even though he's not a Black designer, maybe just because I am somebody who he knows, you know, it then makes this whole thing of success in design being a lot more accessible. And so again, this is why this book is needed, right? I'm gonna, let's see, where do I go? I'm gonna skip that one. And Ruha Benjamin wrote our foreword. So would anyone like to read a quote from Ruha? And if you're new to the book club, this is how we do things.
This is not simply about inclusion and diversity. This is not simply about inclusion and diversity, a liberal project that recognizes the design traditions of racialized groups. The issue is that the dominant approaches to technological design hide and perpetuate the violent frictions of our world. Minimalism always obscures complexity.
There's another slide. If Gwendolyn, if you like, you could continue reading.
Too often, cosmetic representation, digital blackface stands in for substantive change to the real conditions of people's lives. So how do we move toward the latter? For starters, I invite you to listen carefully to the contributors of this volume, for they, like Lauren Olamina, are seeding new ways of thinking, imagining, and building a new world amid the rubble of the old.
So that Lauren Olamina, who Ruha Benjamin refers to, she is the protagonist of Parable of the Sower. And she is young, Black, believes she's disabled, and is imagining and building a new world after destruction. And so Ruha Benjamin is putting this huge task on us, I suppose, where she's saying that, or not task, she's saying that we are imagining and building a new world of design. So I'm going to go into give you an overview of the chapters, right? So the first chapter, Kareem Collie is the editor, and this is design practices, where in this chapter we learn how Black creatives cultivate, hone, and master the skills necessary to develop and sustain their creative work and output. We have essays by Dorothy Hayes, and this is a historical essay that we've reprinted. And that's followed by a conversation from 3 people in tech, Daryl Crooks, Ian Spalter, and Dantley Davis. Then there is an essay by Van Graves, where Van Graves talks about all of the credentials that we need to have as Black designers. So Van Graves is actually doing a PhD, and he's like, this is just another thing that I have to do, as a Black designer, get another credential. Then we have John Key, who writes from the perspective of being Black and queer and young. Then we have Quinlan Messenger's journal entries, where he's talking about identity, being Black and Native American at the same time. And then finally, we have Anika Hanstein Izora's essay. It's slippy. There are a lot of essays, right? I'm not going to remember every single one. So all of these in chapter 1 emphasize the role of identity in shaping their respective modes of practice that are also free from psychological and institutional constraints. I think that there was a quote from Anika that I wouldn't mind. So Anika gives some advice in her essay. Would anyone like to read?
Hello. The advice I give to design students who are trying to navigate their own intersectional identities and spaces is, if the thing that you're looking for doesn't exist, to build your own tables. I think that's the biggest advice that I have, is to build your own tables, to build your own spaces, your own journals, your own signs, your own sites, your own archives that can hold all the abundance that you are. To refuse to dilute yourself for organizations or academies or companies, whatever it may be. If there is a space that is asking you to dilute a part of who you are, I would move away from it and build your own table and build your own space. Page 113.
Thank you. And so this is actually a theme that comes up in quite a few of the essays, right? Just build your own thing, which is something that really we can't hear enough. Lauren Williams talks about this. Maurice Cherry talks about this. Maurice talks about how he started his really successful podcast. Nee Botchway also kind of hints at this, that if these spaces won't let us in, we just need to build our own. I think that's a good message for us to hear. In chapter 2, Anne Berry is the editor, and in this chapter, we are capturing the voices of Black design educators, Maurice Woods, Colette Gator, Steve Jones, Teresa Moses, Chris Rudd, and Kalina Sales. And then we're reflecting on, actually, I'm gonna jump to this one. And so these 5 contributors, they're looking at design education through different lenses. So Maurice talks about the Interact project, which he developed over 17 years ago to support historically excluded, primarily Black and brown youth in the field. Colette Gator shares her perspectives on the harmful systemic impact of white as normal in education, as well as in society at large. And she looks at this through the lens of publication design. Steve Jones emphasizes the significance of one's cultural context in Unvisible, contrasting his experiences with his advice for Black design students and design students of color. Terry Moses, she discusses an educational framework that she co-developed, which is called, oh my goodness, I don't have the name on my, Racism Unthought, yes. And then Chris Rudd actually shares his curriculum for a class about race and politics of design. And I've heard Chris talk about that class many times, but he's actually opened it up and anyone can now repeat because he put the entire curriculum in the book. And then Kalina Sales writes about her experience as a Black design educator working in a historically Black university teaching design. So the quote, somebody jump in and unmute. And let's see what Steve Jones says.
I can jump in.
Yes.
Your professor will make it clear in not so many words that your self-portrait isn't sufficiently good because your biography, your life experience is too foreign to him, something he cannot relate to. Language artifacts and confessions that comprise your work is something that he has never encountered, and therefore it does not meet whatever familiar criteria he envisioned a work on self-identity should be. You will think to yourself, my identity is central to who I am and how I see the world. How can a professor diminish a project on self-identity because he's not familiar with it?
Yeah, and so many people know this experience, I'm sure, as a professor, I join a lot of committees, and I'll share with you, like I was in a committee recently where the student was doing a project about his Latin American identity that I thought this project was fantastic. And then when I heard the other people being very critical of it, I was like, it's literally what Steve Jones was saying, that when these professors don't identify what they think is familiar, then they are, hypercritical of the work. So Steve Jones gives a lot of these guidelines for young designers about, how to move beyond this, right? Anyone else wants to read this other slide by Steve Jones?
I can do it.
Thank you.
As Black folk, when we create work to appease the white gaze, we will inevitably fall short. We will be unable to create something in any logical manner that feels truthful and comfortable. Instead, embrace what you intimately know. You will be hesitant at first, and rightfully so, because it goes against the very real, constant dynamic of what it means to traverse the brutal, racialized American landscape as a Black person. But it is not your burden to bring your instructors up to speed on the racial dynamics of this country. Remind yourself that your history is American history, not some remote concept.
Yeah. I don't know how long it took Steve to write this, but you know, it is, I think, a message that just resonates with so many people, right? I see Jennifer put something in the chat, you know, and it is about being othered or, you know, being seen as outside of the mainstream. So it is, yes, written about Black design, but it applies to so many other people, right? So here's a spread from Chris's book, and then I'll take you into chapter 3, behind schedule, of course, right? So chapter 3 is one of the chapters that I was the editor of, and we have work by Audrey Bennett, Nii Kwame Bochwe, who's a professor in South Africa, Cheryl Miller, Alicia Ola Shula Ajayi, and David Pilgrim. And so just a quick overview of what people are doing in this, this chapter. So Audrey Bennett and Alicia Ajayi, they share more academic studies where Audrey, Dr. Bennett, right, debunks the Greek origin myth of the golden ratio, while Alicia focuses on freedom papers, you know, which I think I mentioned this in the introduction. Like in the Caribbean, we say, what do we say? Freedom, oh my, free paper bun up. That's the expression that we use all the time, which means that you're no longer free to do stuff, but it's just like a really casual thing that we say. But Audrey talks about this as an actual, not Audrey, Alicia talks about this as an actual design artifact, you know, that somebody designed these freedom papers. Cheryl shares her process for establishing her research trajectory about Black design. Nii Kwame Bochwe practically tells us to burn it all down and questions both how we define Blackness and then what we call design. And then finally, David Pilgrim describes the power of racist objects from America's Jim Crow period and how he uses these racist objects to teach social justice. So a quote from Nii's essay. Anyone could.
I'm not interested in talking about my Black experience in design because that very categorization situates me in a global design paradigm, not of mine, nor of my people's making. And as I will show, it is death. I don't identify as Black. I am what is that, a George, a G?
No,
a
it's
guy. Guy. I belong to the Gagdangme ethnic group. I am African. This is the design that ties me to a place, people, culture, and heritage.
So when I got that essay back from Nii, and he says, look, you are talking about the Black experience in design, but you have to think about what makes you identify yourself as Black, right? I know who I am. I am African. I am not Black. I don't use that term, and I have to think, oh yeah, right? It's a really kind of powerful reflection that Nii makes. I'll share another little excerpt from Nii's. Let's see, anyone can jump in. Yes.
The design that categorizes me and my people as Black does everything to disconnect me from our culture, our heritage, and our future. It is a dead spirit. It is death. So having the spiritual higher understanding, why would I want to be defined by something that is deaf to my being and my people?
So Nii's essay started off like maybe twice the length that it actually is. And so sometimes I have to remember what is in the actual version in the book and what ended up on the cutting room floor, you know. But Nii, again, the same way he questioned the word Black, he's questioning this concept of design, you know, and he is analyzing in his design practice and his teaching practice, what is a more African-centered way of doing design. You know, like he says that design has to be linked to farming. It has to be linked to people, and present some other principles that we could be looking at in the way that we practice design. So moving into chapter 4, chapter 4 delves deeply into the aspects of design that focus on serving communities in need and magnifies the voice of practitioners who partner with underrepresented and under-resourced communities. So we have essays by Mugenda, I can never pronounce his last name, Rittner, who is a professor in Kenya, Jennifer White Johnson, Sloan Leo, June Grant, Michelle Washington, Amos Kennedy, Liz Ogbu, and Rajesh Shah. I'm going back to the slide to see some of my notes. Okay, not there. All right, so what we have is Liz Ogbu in her essay. The essay is called The Preconditions to Healing, and she reflects on what communal healing looks like. Mugendi writes an article called Participatory and Emancipatory Aspirations in Africa, and then he actually questions human-centered design and community engaged design and how these are relevant to the African context. June Grant, she presents an argument for recentering the focus of urban development away from political pressure to political pressure bonded solely to economic models, to creating healthy communities by centering the voices of people who have been relegated to the margins. Michelle Washington walks us through a student project in which her design class co-creates with a community to reimagine their connection with nature. Amos Kennedy advocates for a world in which designers can take their time and honor their own best humanity. And Rajesh Shah shares how racial and gender identities inform her work as a designer, educator, and a nerdy global climate change activist. And so for this chapter, we have like a really, Amos Kennedy produced these posters for us based on the essays of other participants in this chapter. You'll see Chris Rudd's poster here because Chris Rudd's essay originally would have been in this chapter and then we moved it. But this was an interesting exploration in, again, a visual essay where Amos Kennedy made these posters that I keep thinking, okay, so what are we going to do with all this fantastic artwork? We haven't decided yet what we're going to do next with it. I'm going to move you into chapter 5. So chapter 5 is another chapter that I curated. And this one was about Afrofuturism. And we have essays by Lonnie Brooks, Woodrow Winchester III, Ada Paris, John Jennings, and Fo Wilson. So Lonnie Brooks shares how focusing on the future empowers him to imagine, play, and reflect. And he shares a game that he has created about designing the future based on an African-American perspective. Woodrow Winchester proposes engaging Afrofuturism to create a more inclusive technological future. And he proposes a framework called Black-centered design, through which he believes all people will be better served as we address the needs of marginalized groups. John Jennings traces the history of Afrofuturism, and then the lack of references to people of color in works about speculative fiction and sci-fi. And so he challenges us as Black designers to reimagine stories and then tells us that Afrofuturism can support us as we do this necessary work. Ada Paris creates a framework of 5 guiding principles for every Black designer as they move through their worlds and plan for the future. And then she asked this question, what kind of ancestors do we want to be? And says that that's her golden rule as a designer. And Fo Wilson shares glimpses into the many factors that have built her version of Afrofuturism. So let's see what Lonnie said. Inviting someone to read us again.
Afrofuturist scholars in particular understand the history of oppressive cruelty exerted upon the Black diaspora as a pathway to the future with Indigenous peoples. We have had their land stolen who were likewise ripped from their former planets, from imaginary Afro-Caribbean nation states to Australian Aboriginal films to Native American science fiction seers.
And I'm going to ask you to continue, Kisa.
Okay, we aim to recover counterfutures, to make new memories, and to imagine virtual, augmented, and real spaces. To navigate these tributaries, did I say that right? Tributaries, okay. Black futures yield new, less familiar terms where we mine for the signals comprising constellations of Afro-future types that yield an expansive Afro-futurescape, etched in a forecasting language that sings to us as we toil, embrace, rise above our own metaphorical equivalents of cruelty.
All right. And Lonnie is a full professor, I believe, at Berkeley, I'm going to say. No, but a school in California. I think it's not Berkeley, right? And so Lonnie's paper is, it is more of the, he's very well published, but he is then showing how we can bring our culture into science and academic research, right? Let's see. Kelly, chapter 6 is up. How you want to do this, Kelly?
I'll just say really quickly, again, just jumping in, that I think you have one more slide after, right? That has
yes.
the slide with the names. So I was one of the editors for chapter 6 with Journeys in Design. And it features a kind of infographic essay by Anikas Advice, a reflective essay by Forrest Young, an essay by Shesha Garbett. And one of the interesting things that we wove into this chapter were images from our former and current students. So it's almost less of an essay as it is like imagery that's come from and contributed by students that we've had in the past. And we kind of close this chapter with essays by Michelle Joan Wilkinson, Sabine Maxine Lopez, and Aisha Richards. And the amazing part I would just say about the arc of this chapter is kind of digging into deeply about what a journey can look like. And because we are including contributions from folks who are at different points in their journey, you have folks who are like just beginning and getting out of school to mid-career to just kind of figuring out what their entry is in design. And so I think if you go to the next slide, these just kind of show some imagery that's included in there of Yocosta's essay. Definitely encourage everyone to get this particular book and to look in this chapter as well. And if you go to, I think I'll just read. Yeah, well, before you do, I'll just read one passage that comes from Forrest Young in his essay. And he speaks to what's called professional lattices. And it states, a professional lattice can be formed between those designers who are able to traverse the precarious bridge from entry level to managerial stations. They are the representative role models that close the loop on the cycle of cultivation. Eschewing token roles, these designers are warriors within our profession, restructuring the field as they move through it. The lattice left in their wake offers lateral pathways to rising designers when glass ceilings are impeding their progress. So just wanted to kind of highlight that passage as well by Forrest Young in his essay, In Pursuit of a Prismatic Profession. And then if you go to the next one, chapter 7, this was another chapter that I was really excited to work with as well. And it was called Design Equals Art Does Not Equal Design. And I was pushing and leaning into this space partially because I sit in this intersection and see myself in multiple roles, as I'm sure many of you do as well. And I wanted to unpack the tensions that exist between design and art, or what these labels mean, and how designers are sort of navigating between spaces. And so in this chapter, there is mostly interviews, two of which that I did with Nancy Mutiti and Say Adams. There is a reflective essay by Rick Griffith. And then there's also an interview with Mimi and Romy, and an interview at the very end with Rhea Combs and Ann H. Berry. And you can go to the next slide. I think one of the things that I find I was really excited about in working with Rick was that he was able to really touch into his own unpacking of art and design. And so I'll pass this to someone potentially in the room here, if anyone might want to read this particular passage.
I'm writing to the person who thinks in polygons and facets as a model for ideas that can be welded together to make vessels that hold other ideas as objects in various scales. I also write to those who do not think this way, but who will appreciate the opportunity to follow multiple ideas in multiple timelines with various motivations and invitations. You will find multiples quite my thing if you follow me and allow for lots of things to be happening at the same time, because things be actually happening all the time.
Exactly. And it's amazing. I think if you do get to see this particular essay, Rick has diagrams that are interwoven that sort of unpack even his thinking. So that's another sort of component to this particular essay as well. And I think there's one more slide, right, Leslie?
Yeah.
I think, would someone like to read this last passage from chapter 7? This is by Rhea Combs.
I can read. As a curator of color, I recognize there are many things happening simultaneously. In many instances, curators of color have to educate colleagues about why an idea is relevant to present at the museum. And that idea is associated with a whole host of other institutional challenges, such as lack of historical awareness surrounding the subject, funding concerns, or worry the content might challenge donors or trustees. So, as a Black curator, you have a huge responsibility to justify something, educate somebody, and then prove that there is a thing such as Black excellence. And then there is the art of presenting the work in such a way that is smart, nuanced, and not patronizing the artist.
Thank you, Renata. I'll pass it back to Leslie.
Yeah, well, I love those two quotes. Again, just relevant to everybody, you know, that we end up having to do these many levels of education, you know, and I particularly found Rick's quote was interesting because of what we talk about, you know, pluriversality, where he reminds, you know, actually puts it in writing, things are happening all the time, right? Okay, chapter 8. Is another chapter that I curated, and this one is about collective, radical, and liberatory spaces in design. And I really was excited about this chapter. So the contributions are by Lauren Williams, Terrence Moline, Maurice Cherry, and Melanie Barnett, Ari Melanciano, and Adrienne Marie Brown. And they all talk about the necessity of building spaces specifically for Black self-preservation, emancipation, liberation, and celebration. So Lauren Williams, I don't think I have a quote from her essay, but it's one that I recommend to everybody. She writes a love letter to Black women and reminds us that we don't need them, meaning the institutions or the little prizes that these institutions want to throw us along the way, kind of like we're enough. Terrence Moline is the founder of a group called the African American Graphic Designers Group. It's active, very active on Facebook. And so he takes a little bit of a controversial position and he defends the need for segregated spaces for Black designers to thrive. And he actually reminds us of the forgotten benefits of segregated spaces that provide comfort and safety. Maurice Cherry, who many of you might know from Revision Path podcast, he's an example to us all, because he tells us make the history for ourselves. So he shares in his essay the difficulty of creating a podcast that focused on Black design and how he almost gave up. Mulaney Barnett wrote about her feelings of invisibility in the design industry and how that started at college, and it has remained with her throughout her career, even though, again, she's someone who's really successful. She formed the Black Artist Design Guild. I might have gotten the name wrong, but it is aimed at building visibility for Black designers who might otherwise remain invisible in interior design in particular. Ari Malanciano shares how the technology festival Afrotectopia, how she began this thing. And she shows the importance of getting that really strong Black identity and confidence and agency at a young age, and how she was able to carry that through her work up till today. And then Adrienne Marie Brown talks to us about creating transformative, liberatory, and radical spaces as designers. And she shares advice to support Black designers as they move into new roles, roles of facilitation, organizing, and activism. So some more, I think 2 more quotes to end off.
The initial advice I would have for Black designers is to listen for the design that is the original design within you. The design that predates the trauma, the design that predates the socialization, the design that predates the shaping of Blackness as something lacking or something absent or something less than or something plagued by suffering and struggling and pain. If you can lean into the concept of design as the sacred work of creating the world in which we share space, share lives, share the miracle, to me, that's the impetus of Black design.
All right. And then the closing advice from Adrienne Marie Brown. Would someone like to read it, please?
The last thing that I would add for Black designers is to really think outrageously in terms of the scale of their visions. I want to see Black designers looking at the entire cityscape, looking at the entire community garden efforts, looking at the entire intentional community efforts. I want them to really think on a large scale. I want them to ask themselves, what would things look like? What would the aesthetic be if the nation focused on Black design? I want Black designers to not just think about a building or an object, not just to think about an interior. Practice. Have a really massive vision, because I do think that this is your time or our time.
Our time.
So.
Yes. So, I mean, every time I think about that, that's the name of Adrienne Marie Brown's essay, This Is Our Time. And I think it's like such a powerful statement. I'm going to stop sharing so we could continue the conversation. You know, it is something that we need to hear, that, you know, we need to think bigger, we need to have bigger dreams and things like that. And it was, I'll give you a little bit of a backstory. That was, I think, a 15-minute conversation with Adrienne Marie Brown, right? It was planned. She was busy. She was maybe doing her shopping or something like that. She stopped her car and sat in her parking lot and did the Zoom call with me. And that essay is like one take in this very short conversation, but it's just so powerful. So it's another one that I recommend that people read. So we have a few minutes and people can jump in the conversation however they would like to. Or we could give you all backstories as well.
I got a question. Will you guys be doing another book?
Kelly, have we even spoken about that?
I mean, I think we are just trying to make sure this book gets through to the world. But like, I feel like we have so many people that we would love to connect with, I think. And I think just given time and the short sort of turnaround, like there are essays and things like Lesley mentioned that like would have been included, and just for time, we just weren't able to kind of wrap them up. So there's so much content. I mean, I think we just are scratching of the surface, even though it's 600 pages, the scratching of like so much.
I agree.
Yeah, I think Kelly, you could back me up on this or confirm. Didn't we plan something like a 300-page book?
I mean, I think the publisher initially had us at around, I think 200 or 300 pages. And I think it was through, you know, we were just getting these amazing essays and we knew we needed to include this and that, and it sort of continued to expand. And in a weird way, like we just kept going. I think we kept going. And it was only when we actually got to like, I think 595 or close to 600 that they're like, wait, it has to actually be 600. It can't go beyond that. So.
Charlotte.
Yeah, I was curious. Like I'm super excited. I haven't done. I've started the intro, and then I was like, oh, how do I read it? Do I read it like continuously, like from part 1 to part 6, or do I kind of like sometimes to start at the end or in the middle? And I was like, do you have like, I don't know, I feel like a kind of a reading
strategy,
because I also know that sometimes artists like musicians, when they made CD before, like they planned a track to like have a flow, and that kind of, if you listen to it now in Spotify, it kind of disrupts the flow that they had start off. So I also don't want to like mess the flow.
So people have asked me that question, and I say, okay, it is described as an anthology, and I say treat it like how you might treat a collection of short stories where you just have it on the side of your bed and maybe you just open it on, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you open it on this page and you read that, because a lot of the pieces are very short. So like, I don't really recommend anybody do a continuous 595-page read. For this book talk, that was the first time, but when we were editing, I went through page by page, but I wasn't reading, if you understand what I mean. And then it's really like to prepare for this session. This is the first time I've actually gone through it in a more chronological way. Yeah, I mean, because it's so much content, I would say just kind of treat it like tapas, where you're picking in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think if you check the table of contents, I'm sure there are things that will stick out to you first, so you might jump around too in that way.
Just to comment on Jennifer's questions or comments. Jennifer, I think you have the book. I'm not sure, but if you do, you probably want to head to Jennifer White Johnson's essay, which is actually, this was something I had planned to say in the presentation. Some of the essays are content by Black designers, and some of the essays are content about the experience of Black designers. I don't know if you understand the difference that I'm making. So some of it is it's design work that they are describing, and some are writing more about their experience as Black designers. And one of the essays that I think is pretty interesting, and I actually assigned it for a class on disability, is Jennifer White Johnson's essay, where she is talking about her perspective as a disabled mother with a disabled child, and when I was preparing for that class on disability, I was struggling to find diverse content. And then I was like, but we have this stuff here, in our book, right? So, or even if you are talking about, you're teaching a class about sustainability, for example, that's another area where I think questions about sustainability are so often presented as very white, very upper middle class. But we have quite a few people who are writing about sustainability, you know, Rajesh Shah, June Grant, Michelle Washington, right? S. Mursal. Yes.
Sorry, yes, I realised my full name isn't on there. It's Sarah. Thank you very much. I just wanted to find out really about, because I'm very into the pluriverse and the community, but also one thing I realised with my design students, I get a lot of neurodiverse students. And that means dyslexia, dyspraxia, you know, they're creatives, but they struggle with kind of just accessing theories and information in a written form. So I wondered if you thought about that with your book, because I think it's something that is, if we can essentially aim to have the lesson from their point of view and teach, you know, more inclusively, I think that's quite an interesting pluriversal kind of idea.
I think an audiobook would be an amazing idea. Like, I don't even think, I know there's like the whole Kindle thing, but an audiobook sounds like we got to put that down on the list, Lesley.
Yeah, we do. No, so there's some of the production that we can just suggest, right? Like when somebody had asked us about reprinting, and then we can't respond to that. You know, it's in the publisher's hand. But I definitely think an audiobook is something. I don't even know if there's a Kindle version available. I'm not sure.
Is it? Not usually there should be like a digital version. I believe it is. I think
okay. And then, you know, because I have so many requests from people who speak Portuguese, you know, I'm like, okay, when are we going to translate this thing, right? But, you know, definitely it's something that we would continue to talk with the publishers about. Kristen?
Hey, I just wanted to thank you both for the space and the time. Is there a place that we can go to continue to support you and your wonderful work?
Oh, let me put the website in the
chat. Just drop it in the chat. Thank you again.
Yeah, there's more information here. Again, there's some of the documentation of the events, or our original book launch that we had back in February is also listed here. So yeah, more information will be shared on the website.
All right, so I will get the last question in.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to say this was great. My first time joining this meeting, and I own a community newspaper in Minnesota. I would love to be able to extend this conversation to ordinary people in community. And so are there ideas that you have how this kind of conversation about our future, about our capabilities, about our gifts can become table conversation, dinner conversation between boys and girls who are 7 years old or 20 years old or 90 years old? How do we reorient our entire body of conversation to reflect a consciousness about the expansiveness of our humanity, the antiquity of our humanity, and the certainty of our future?
That's a huge question, Al. But actually, so we are continuing the conversations. Like the Museum of Design in Atlanta has 3 conversations scheduled, with one with editors and one with, they're going to decide who they want to be involved in the conversations, you know. And so like if other people want us to continue the conversations, you can reach out. We might not always be available, but you can reach out. And certainly you can definitely follow some of the people, well, follow all of the contributors, but like Lonnie Brooks is pretty exciting. You know, it does really exciting workshops. That's how I considered inviting him to be in the book, because I had seen one of his workshops where he's doing these games about the Afrofuture, right? And so definitely you want to look up all of the people in the book and follow them, but feel free to reach out to us as editors, and we could see how we could facilitate the conversation, right?
Super. Thank you.
Now, I know that we are at time, so I have to go to class. Mariana, I'm handing it back to you.
Right. Thank you everyone for coming over. It was a great section. Lesley and Kelly, thank you so much. I got emotional, so I am just mostly silent. But it was really great, really.